We dig into a big offseason for the San Jose Barracuda, the additions that they made, and if they can make a jump to the playoffs with inside the NHL's Tony Androckitis on today's episode.
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, caretaker at The Reef, also co-host of Western Conference Tuesdays on the Locked On NHL channel. Want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Proudly part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. And if you want to be an everydayer, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch this on YouTube as well. And today we are going to look at the Barracuda and kind of what their offseason looks like and some other potential additions that they could be, just kicking the tires on their goalie. So we have Tony Androckitis of Inside the AHL, where he joins the show. So we kind of talk about, some of the big pieces that they added, and if this roster can kind of make a step from being one of the worst teams in the AHL to at least make some waves in the playoffs. And then I'm going to give my opening night projected Barracuda roster. So before we get to all that, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. These sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And now we are joined by Tony Androckitis, who, if you cover anything, if you know anything about AHL hockey, he is the dude at Inside AHL. Tony, how's it going, buddy?
Good. How's it going with you?
Not too bad. Why don't you bring you on, because the Barracuda have added some big pieces this offseason, and we wanted to just kind of take a look at where this Barracuda roster is and kind of expectations for this team, as they have been one of the worst teams in the AHL the past couple of years. But let's start with some of the big additions the Barracuda added. And I think you have to start with the forward, Andrew Poturalski. This is like a really, really big addition to the Barracuda's forward group, right?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Like when he's in the AHL, he's, point per player game, top line center, power play, logging huge minutes. And he's shown he's basically a proven winner. He's been in the Calder Cup finals. I think it's 3 or 4 years straight now. So definitely a guy you want to have your younger players sort of learning from too. He's, an older guy, still wants to get to the NHL, but sort of understands the situation he's in. And, he's a guy that when he was in Coachella Valley the last 2 years, kind of, helping those young guys get used to the pro game, because, obviously it's such a huge jump from, whether they're coming from junior or the college game. The pro game is a whole new beast, and the AHL is just a real grind. Everyone that you talk to says it's just a real grind of a schedule, the league, the teams. It's just it's a huge step, and having those high end prospects is nice, but they sort of need someone on the ice that could sort of show them the way.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, of course, the grind, and especially when you're a West Coast team, right, with the Barracuda, where the closest team next to them is Bakersfield, which is about a 3-hour bus ride, 3 to 4 hour bus ride. Like the schedule, you're playing basically back to backs every weekend. Like it is a definitely a grind, and having someone like why do I always screw up his name? Poturalski, who has been there and done it, right? And he worked with Shane Wright last year with the Kraken. Like this is a huge, and I know the Sharks have added some guys like this before, like an Andrew Poturalski who lasted a year and stuff. But I think this is, though, like if you look at some of the like AHL exclusive guys, like he feels like one of those guys who's like at the cream of the crop, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Top tier guy, top tier player. Like I said, that's, when you have all these young, prospects, and obviously the Sharks have, brought in through the draft a lot of, high end prospects. You need high end veterans to sort of, teach them. And, the older guys learn from the new guys too, but it's just such a learning experience for the younger guys. And they don't have to jump right in and be the guy. That's a huge thing too. Sort of take the pressure off some of these younger kids that they don't have to step right in and be those point per player games, or if they make a mistake, those things are going to happen. And I don't want to say there's not eyes on them, because obviously there's always people watching, but it sort of takes the pressure off of them, I think.
Yeah, where they can kind of naturally work into that top tier spot without having to kind of be thrown into it. The Sharks also added, or the Barracuda also added 2 defensemen, one in Lucas Carlsson and Jimmy Schuldt. Both, again, kind of top tier defensive AHL players. So where do you want to start, Carlsson or Schuldt? Which one do you want to start with?
We'll go with Carlsson. I guess we'll go alphabetical order. He's probably the best offensive defenseman in the AHL the last 2 years. I know this past season he missed the end of the season. He had a season-ending injury, but he was again on pace for a 20-goal season as a defenseman again, and power play quarterback, just high-end offensive ability, and definitely someone that could help the younger forwards too, because he's bringing the puck up ice. He's a really good puck handler, good passer, just real high end offensive talent. And then Schuldt on the other end of that, he's more a steady Eddie kind of guy that he can play the puck and produce offense, but he's good sound defensively. And the same thing with both of those guys, proven winners. Carlsson was a big part of the Charlotte Checkers, and obviously Schuldt also Coachella Valley, like Poturalski. He's been in the Calder Cup finals the last 2 years, so you could kind of see from these signings that San Jose's probably trying to get their AHL. I mean, it's not all about success as a team in the AHL level, obviously, but you want your prospects playing in the playoffs and playing in high pressure situations. And it seems like the Sharks organization, just as an outside perspective, I don't cover them all the time, but from the outside looking in, it looks like they're they want those guys to take that next step and get that that playoff experience. So these moves kind of show that they're kind of serious about putting some successful a winning culture and that environment in the AHL as well.
Yeah, and then you also still have Jack Thompson, who they acquired last year at the trade deadline, who's probably not going to crack the NHL roster, but that gives you 3 like legitimate defensemen to kind of cycle in with some of these young guys and who are going to start to kind of make their impact here. And with and we don't even know about Shakir Bukmadulin, who's going to be fighting for an NHL job, but could also be back on the AHL as well. Like this blue line, which has been kind of a mess the past couple seasons, really got a big injection of talent with these 2 signings, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it also creates that inner competition. I mean, sometimes prospects get rushed because there isn't that depth, or they don't have those guys to call up, and they look overwhelmed or overmatched, and it could really, ruin their confidence, or, they might be trending upward, but then they have a little hiccup, and then, they're back almost to square one. So especially early on in a season to have, these veteran guys that you could call up. And same thing, like if they're, not playing as much or in and out of the lineup, the older guys can handle that, I think, a lot better than, these younger guys that come in. And obviously everyone wants to get to the NHL, but getting there in the right situation and at the right time that is right for those specific players, I think is a huge deal.
All right, guys, before we continue with Tony and we talk about if this team can maybe make some playoffs and some of the players he likes potentially in free agency, as well as some goalies that are still out there, just need to take a quick break. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app, dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, let's look at kind of this roster as a whole, right? And you kind of mentioned it, where this team is looking to try to kind of make a step, right? And you have a lot of guys who are like kind of the prospects who are entering that 3rd season. You have like Tristan Robbins, you have Brandon Coe, who are going to be entering their 3rd seasons. You also have Ethan Cardwell, who had a really, really great season as a rookie. Phil Beested, who's had a really nice kind of debut at the end of the season. Like, there's a lot of young talent, but then you also have the guys we mentioned, and then you're going to have potentially a guy like Thomas Borlo, who's fighting for an NHL job. You have Justin Bailey, who was supposed to be an AHL guy last year, but ended up spending most of the season in NHL. Like, this is a much deeper roster than maybe some of the previous seasons we've seen, right?
Oh, definitely. Can't say offhand. I don't think the Barracuda have been in the playoffs since like 2018 or 2019.
Yeah,
I
it's
know
been a
there's been
while.
pandemic seasons, so
Yes.
obviously throughout the course of the season, depth is tested. You see, Hershey won back-to-back Calder Cups. Their guy that was in and out of the lineup, fourth line, a guy like Matt Strome scores the game-winning, Calder Cup goal. Especially in the AHL, you need 30 guys at least, because not only do you have your own injuries, you have call-ups from and injuries from the NHL team to deal with as well. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of shuffling that goes on throughout a season. So starting the year with that depth, is definitely a big advantage to have. And usually the teams, sometimes there's a team that just has a couple high-end guys that carry the team, but usually it's done by committee, and the teams that are successful year in and year out just have that depth.
And then that doesn't even mention there's a guy, Casper Haltonen, who's could be a big addition too, who's eligible to play in the AHL this year. We'll see if he goes back to London or if he makes the Barracuda there as well. So, I mean, this is a team that has, we've been looking at this, especially this 2020 draft, right, with Bordelot and with Robbins and Co. and Daniel Gushin, like these guys to kind of make their, kind of start to put together a winning team. And I think, like you mentioned, right, this team, this Sharks group, they've been wanting this young team to start playing playoff hockey because it has been such a long, both with the Sharks and the Barracuda, neither one of them making the playoffs in years at this point, and trying to instill some winning culture. So how important do you think it would be for these guys to make, I mean, even if it's just get to the playoffs and kind of make some waves in the playoffs, how important do you think that is for their development?
Oh, absolutely. Any coach, player you talk to, a playoff game is like 5 times the experience of a regular season game because the stakes are higher and the pressure's on. And, obviously there's a ton of talent in the league, but as it gets less and less teams in the mix, the bar just gets raised that much higher. So I think for the Sharks organization, I think that's probably their goal is to, get those prospects some playoff time this season. And like I said, you see the moves they made in free agency, it sort of, jives with, that's probably what their plan is to, insulate the younger players, but also, have them take that next step and get into the playoffs and, see what that is all about, because it is a completely different animal than the regular season.
All right. On the blue line, right, we mentioned the 3 guys with Jack Thompson, Schuldt, and Carlsson. There's also going to be some other guys who are going to be kind of in the mix too. You have Galen LaRock, who's suffered some injuries. Luca Cagnoni, another one of those guys who could go back to the WHL or make his jump to the AHL. You have Guriev. You don't know, again, Muka Madulin could be like, do you think the Sharks have a good balance here of veteran guys with some of these young guys to try to, or do you think maybe they should try to look to instill some more, or look for some more talent in the AHL, at least on the blue line?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely, I mean, I don't want to say surprised, but they, didn't make a ton of moves early on in free agency, but the moves they did made for the AHL team were really big ones. So I guess, I mean, there's always room for more depth, and, that just makes the competition within the team, that much more difficult. And, that brings the best out in guys, I think, too. And, guys aren't just handed that power play role or handed that top 6 role. They have to, come into the rink day in and day out and work and earn that. So I think in the long run, that's going to be incredibly beneficial. It's kind of weird now that, free agency, we're already a month into it now, and you see some of the names that are still available, and it's just like, how are these guys, unsigned? Like, I think today Alex Nylander signed an AHL contract, and he finished the year in the NHL scoring like a goal per game. So it's kind of interesting, especially when guys get to that 260 game mark and they become an AHL veteran by, the AHL developmental rule, that, those jobs are fewer and far between because you can only dress so many. So there's definitely still a lot of good veteran players out there. But then again, you can only play 6, so you kind of have to be careful not to bring in too many. So it's kind of it's kind of a balance there.
All right, we'll get to free agents here in a second, but I want to talk about the goaltending, which you have Magnus Krona and Georgi Romanov is kind of the 1-2 right now. And I think by the end of the season, I think Romanov had kind of taken that starting job and was kind of the better of the two goalies. But the Mike Gers also said that they could be in the market for a third goalie to try to kind of be that liaison where if the Sharks need somebody up in the NHL, they can go play in the NHL, or if they need him to just kind of hang out in the AHL and be a good guy to some of these young goaltenders. Is this potentially where the Sharks or where the Barracuda might fall apart, you think, with the lack of goaltending depth here?
Yeah, say right now, I guess at the AHL level, they have two guys that were just rookies last year. I think their first pro season, so not a lot of experience there. But like you said, they could probably use that organizational number 3 guy that you could pull him up to be the backup, behind whoever they have in San Jose starting that night, and it doesn't really ruin their development there. You need like a veteran guy. I kind of agree with you. Maybe that organization number 3 they should look to, and in the goalie market too, there's a lot of, pretty solid AHL veteran goalies still available too.
All right, so let's go to free agency here. Like, who's left? I know we're pretty deep into the weeds here in the middle of summer with who's left and stuff, but let's start with the goalies. Who are some of the potential goalies available that you personally like, that are still out there?
Yeah, some guys that come to mind, like Magnus Hellberg. He's kind of been a journeyman goaltender. He's played overseas. He's played, he has a lot of experience. He was in Wilkes-Barre last year, Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. Ended up getting traded mid-season, so I think he finished the year with Charlotte in the Florida organization. But he's a perfect, organizational number 3 guy that can, carry the load in the AHL and be a dependable backup in the NHL. There's some other veterans still available, like Michael Hutchinson still playing. He's got a ton of experience. Malcolm Subban's available. He's been to the conference finals in the AHL the last 2 seasons. So yeah, there's quite a few actually. Aaron Dell, it's probably a familiar name for
Yes.
Sharks fans. He's still unsigned, and he had a pretty decent year with the Ontario Reign last year. So in terms of veteran goaltenders, there's not really a shortage of them available right now. There's quite a few. So probably wouldn't be surprising if the Sharks did add a third goalie, a player like that.
And then again, these aren't Barracuda guys, but just as you kind of mentioned with free agency here, kind of winding down, and you're surprised. So just who are some of the names that you're still a little surprised are on the market right now, and kind of just to give us just a couple names here.
Yeah, I mean, on defense, like a guy like Brad Hunt with the Colorado Eagles last year, he had like 50 points in 70 games. You have Matt Donovan in Chicago had a big year offensively. I know, the plus minus doesn't look good because Chicago wasn't that strong of a team. I think he was like a minus 40 or something ridiculous. But like Lucas Johansson from the Capitals organization, for former first-round pick, he's still available. You look at some of the veteran forwards available, like Rocco Grimaldi, I think had 65 points last year, 35 goals. Rem Pitlick, these are like top line AHL guys. Chase D'Elia, like I don't understand how he's still available. There's just like point per game captain material players, available, and I think it just comes down to, like I said earlier, that veteran rule and guys sort of reaching that 260 game, 320 game plateau where teams are a little bit more hesitant to add a ton of those guys because it doesn't give them as much roster flexibility. But if you have the room for veteran players at the AHL level, those guys are they're gamers and top line, top pairing guys that could really help the prospects.
All right, Tony, thank you so much for your time. Where could the people find you, buddy?
Yeah, so on Twitter at Tony Androck. My website I started, like 10, I think it's like 10 years ago now, InsideAHLHockey.com. We're kind of just, like an independent media outlet trying to cover the league. I know like traditional media has, sort of, I don't want to say fallen apart, but as in terms of AHL coverage, there's just not a ton of it anymore. You don't, like when I started, there was a newspaper or 2 newspaper reporters at every game, and it's few and far between now. So we're kind of just trying to fill the void and give fans on the ground coverage, or people that are actually there at the rink that see these guys, interact with these guys, build relationships with these coaches and players that could sort of give you a bird's eye view, I guess, of what, the prospects are up to, what the AHL teams are up to. And, it's important. These guys, it's kind of funny. You watch NHL broadcasts, it's like this guy came out of nowhere. Nobody comes out of nowhere, right? Like these guys have worked their tail off their entire life. And, there's 2, 3, 5 guys on each AHL team that could easily play in the NHL. It's just kind of waiting for their chance and, being at the right place at the right time, or, being on top of their game when a call up is needed. So it's just a very underappreciated, league as a whole, I think. And, I just like to spotlight, those guys. There's just so many good stories from, not even just prospects, even veteran guys. There's just so many untold stories out there, and I enjoy doing it, and I like telling those kind of stories. So that's why I do it.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at Justin Bailey last year, who was a tryout guy, and then all of a sudden he's plays like 40 games in the NHL last year, and was really good for the Sharks last year on a really, really bad team. But yeah, it's great what you do, Tony. I know I like reading your work, and I know a lot of AHL fans look to you and for especially what you do. So appreciate everything, buddy, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Thank you. All right, guys, before we continue and we look at kind of my projected lines for the Barracuda and kind of talk about maybe some more work that needs to be done, just need to take a quick break. And before we get to the lines, I do want to thank you guys for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Again, probably part of the Locked On Network. When you're done checking out this episode, make sure you guys go check out one of the other great Locked On episodes, especially here in the Bay Area, right? You got Locked On Niners. This gets you covered for everything that's happening with the Niners training camp. And we know that's busy work over there right now with all the storylines they have. You've got Locked On Warriors with Steph over in the Olympics. Of course, you have Locked On A's and Locked On Giants as training camp, or as not training camp, as the trade deadline is right around the corner. So make sure when you're done listening to this episode, go check out one of the other great episodes here at Locked On, because we cover your team every day. All right, let's look at the lines, and this is what I would do, which is probably way too much fun for John McCarthy, but again, it's the end of July, beginning of August, so who knows. So I have a first line of Daniel Gushin, Andrew Poturalski, and Justin Bailey. That line is going to score a bajillion goals because all those guys can score. Bailey, we saw scoring a ton in his limited AHL time, and we saw especially in the preseason. Daniel Gushin, we know, can score. Like that line is that's a very tasty first line. Second line, probably too young, but we have Kasper Halttunen, Philip Bisset, and Ethan Cardwell. One thing I've noticed, the Barracuda have a ton of right-handed shots, so they're probably going to have to guys are going to have to play on the weird side. So if I wanted to get everyone in, there's going to be guys who are playing on their opposite sides, but it is what it is. So I wanted to keep Bisset and Cardwell together because those guys showed a ton of chemistry last year, and I think Cardwell's already earned the kind of the trust of McCarthy and the coaching staff to be able to play a ton of tough situations, and kind of do what you need on that line. And if Cardwell and Bisset are doing good things and passing it to Halttunen, that sounds like super fun to me. Third line, Brandon Coe, Tristan Robbins, and Colin Graff. Again, Graff, who I think could use some some AHL seasoning, as he's a guy coming, played pretty well, I thought, in his NHL debut last year, but I think could use some AHL seasoning. And then you have a fourth line of Mitchell Russell, Giovanni Smith, and Scott Sabrin to provide some nastiness down there with a bit of touch of scoring as well. Like, yeah, I'm pretty excited about that forward group right there. Like that is a really, really fun forward combination to me. Again, probably not what John McCarthy's doing, and it still leaves out a fair amount of guys who played a ton of games last year as well. You have a bunch of young guys, and you also have guys like Anthony Vincent, who played a bunch last year, Joe Carroll, like Luke Granger. Like there's a bunch. Unfortunately, you can only play 12, right? But that's kind of where I leaned, and you can kind of mix and match with plenty of guys, especially in the bottom six there, to try to find a group that you like. But I feel really good about that forward group. On defense, again, a lot of left-handed guys. So you're going to have somebody playing on their offhand. I went a little younger, I think, than what we would probably see McCarthy, because like guys. So here's my pairs. So I have Carlsson and Thompson. Thompson being kind of the offensive guy, Carlsson the steady Eddie guy, as Tony said. Schuldt and Gannon Larocque, where Schuldt is the offensive guy and Larocque can be kind of the steady Eddie guy. And then you have the young pair of Cagnoni and Furlong. Furlong having to play on his offhand, but he did it a bunch in the queue. So and that leaves you with plenty of, like, there's a bunch of depth on the blue line. Terry Pooley, Ethan Frisch, who played a bunch last year, Artem Gurev, Braden Hayes, who this Shark signed, Jeremy Buchler, who again both those guys got signed this offseason. Like there's a ton of guys, and you can send some of those guys down to maybe go play on in the ECHL. Like there's plenty of options for the Barracuda here on the blue line, and much deeper blue line than what we saw last year. And then the goalies, Romanov and Krona. That's how I have it right now, and we'll see if they add another piece there. Again, whether it's like, I always just call the Aaron Dell goalie, like that third goalie who can kind of play. Again, can you play in the NHL and not poop your pants? And then can you just be, maybe you're in big games you're playing, but you're kind of mostly there as a mentor for Romanov and Krona. So yeah, I think if the top end guys who the Shark or the Barracuda added this offseason, like I don't see why, especially when you have a bunch of these, Cardwell going into year 2, Robbins going into year 3, Coe going into year 3, Gushin going into year 3. You have, I think, a good mix of veteran players and younger guys, and some of these younger guys who are now turning into veteran players. I unless the goaltending completely falls apart, I don't see why this team shouldn't be more competitive night in and night out for the Barracuda. And I think the consistency thing is that was a huge issue with them last year. Is, how often will we see them win a game and then turn around and fall flat, or they fall flat in game one of in the second game they play like lights out. Like the team just needs to be more consistent, and whether that's leaning on the veterans who they brought in, they brought in 3 huge veterans, and then you still have guys like Scott Sabrin, Jack Thompson, who's been around for, a couple of years, or at least been an AHL guy for a couple of years. Like there's plenty of I think that's a really good mix right now of what the Barracuda have of veteran guys and younger players. So my expectations are gonna be pretty, like, this team needs to not only be a playoff team, but like firmly a playoff team. None of this like 7 seed sneaking in. Like they need to be like in at least like a 4 or 5 seed going into this thing, because you have the talent there. And maybe the goaltending falls apart or holds it back, but I think we've seen enough from Romanov, especially Romanov, where I think he can kind of take and hold that kind of mantle as the number 1 goalie for the Barracuda. So I'm expecting big things out of the Barracuda, and as the Sharks get better, the Barracuda need to be getting better too, because this is a very talented team, and these guys need to start I think it's a big year for John McCarthy, right? I think he got one more season to try to put some things around, try to put this team into a place that gave them plenty of high quality AHL talent this year with the signings that they have. And this team, I think this team needs to start showing it on the ice, and none of this, like I said, being so inconsistent. So that's going to be it for me today. We'll be back tomorrow with a really fun interview. That's all I'm going to say. So it'll be, there'll be some teasers for it on social media. So make sure, of course, you're following along wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch this on YouTube as well. Follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Again, you're going to want to follow, because there's going to be some teasers or at least one teaser for who's on tomorrow's show. And you're not going to want to miss who's on tomorrow's show. So yeah. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at MyFryhole. Till tomorrow. Bye, friends.